May 14, 1849. Subject number 7 delivered a male child at dawn. The boy's skull measurements exceeded expectations by 1 full inch. His eyes follow movement with unusual precision for an infant merely hours old. I have taken him from the mother's arms. She wept, but she does not understand what we are building here. This is the 5th generation. The bloodlines are purifying. Intelligence, I am certain now, can be cultivated like cotton, harvested like crops, controlled from the very moment of conception. God has given me the tools. The plantation has given me the laboratory. And these people have given me the future. That entry was written by Dr. Josiah Cartwright. A respected physician. A plantation owner. A man whose name appeared in medical journals from Charleston to Richmond. But those journals never published what he wrote in private. They never printed the charts he kept, tracking generations of enslaved families like livestock pedigrees. They never saw the children he separated at birth, raised in isolation, tested for traits he believed he could breed into existence. For over 2 decades, on a remote plantation in the Mississippi Delta, Dr. Cartwright conducted an experiment that turned human beings into specimens. He didn't just own them. He designed them. This is where it happened. A place where science twisted into obsession. Where the language of medicine became the language of control. Where one man's belief in his own brilliance gave him permission to do the unthinkable. He kept records. Meticulous records. Ledgers that tracked not just labor, but bloodlines. Not just ages, but cognitive development. Not just names, but experimental outcomes. And what those records reveal is a program so methodical, so coldly rational, that it challenges everything we think we know about the limits of human cruelty in the name of progress. For years, this story stayed buried. The Civil War erased the records. Families scattered. Survivors stayed silent, carrying secrets too terrible to speak. But in 1932, a trunk was discovered in the abandoned overseer's house. Inside were 23 leather-bound journals. Hundreds of pages of data. Photographs of children labeled only by number. Letters to colleagues describing breakthroughs in hereditary intelligence. And one final entry, dated April 9, 1865, the day Lee surrendered at Appomattox, that read, "The war has ended my work, but not my conclusions. I was right. They will see that I was right. He was wrong. But the damage was already done." This is the story of the doctor's experiment. A story of what happens when intelligence is weaponized. When science serves slavery. When human lives become variables in an equation no one should ever have tried to solve. If you're ready to go deep into one of history's most disturbing chapters, hit that subscribe button right now, because what you're about to hear will change the way you think about science, power, and the cost of ambition. Trust me, you won't believe where this goes. The year is 1825. America is expanding. The cotton economy is booming across the Deep South, and with it, the institution of slavery is becoming more entrenched, more defended, more justified by those who profit from it. In the grand homes of Charleston, the salons of New Orleans, and the plantation estates of the Mississippi Delta, a new kind of conversation is taking place among educated white men. They are not just defending slavery on economic grounds anymore. They are defending it with science. Or what they call science. Phrenology, the study of skull shapes, is becoming fashionable. Racial hierarchies are being drawn up in medical textbooks. Doctors are measuring bones, cataloging features, publishing papers that claim to prove the natural superiority of one race over another. It is a dangerous time for ideas, because bad ideas are being dressed up in the respectable language of research and reason. Into this world steps Dr. Josiah Cartwright. Born in 1798 in South Carolina, Cartwright is the son of a wealthy planter and a mother who prized education above all else. He is sent north to study medicine at the University of Pennsylvania, one of the finest medical schools in the country. He graduated with honors in 1820, returned to the South, and established a practice in Natchez, Mississippi. He is known as a careful physician, a man of science, a rational thinker in a region where folk remedies and superstitions still hold sway among the common people. He marries into another planting family, acquires land, and by 1828, owns a plantation of nearly 800 acres and over 100 enslaved people. He is respected. He is wealthy. And he is curious. Dangerously curious. Cartwright becomes obsessed with heredity. He reads everything he can find on the subject. He devours the works of European naturalists who write about animal breeding, about how farmers select cattle for size, horses for speed, dogs for temperament. He asks himself a question that will define the rest of his life: if traits can be bred into animals, why not into people? And if intelligence is a trait, a measurable, inheritable quality, could it be cultivated, enhanced, concentrated through selective breeding? To most men, this would remain an intellectual exercise, a thought experiment debated over brandy and cigars. But Cartwright is not most men. He owns human beings. He controls their lives, their labor, their families. And he begins to see them not as people, but as an opportunity. A laboratory. A chance to test his theories in the real world. In 1832, Cartwright began keeping a separate set of records. Not the standard plantation ledgers that track work output and expenses, but something else. Something secret. He starts documenting the enslaved families on his property in extraordinary detail. He notes who can read, who shows aptitude for numbers, who learns tasks quickly, who demonstrates what he calls mental acuity. He measures heads. He records lineage. He tracks which children come from which parents and begins to theorize about patterns. He is looking for intelligence, trying to isolate it, trying to see if it runs in families the way he believes it should. And then, in 1835, he took the next step. He begins arranging marriages. This is not unusual in itself. Enslavers have always controlled the intimate lives of enslaved people, forcing unions, separating families, treating human reproduction as another form of property management. But Cartwright is doing something different. He is not just trying to increase the number of people he owns. He is trying to engineer them. He selects a man named Samuel, a skilled carpenter who taught himself to read by studying the labels on supply crates. He pairs Samuel with a woman named Celia, who has a reputation for a sharp memory and quick learning. Cartwright writes in his journal, "I have united two specimens of superior capacity. If my hypothesis holds, their offspring will demonstrate enhanced intellectual traits." This is the first pairing. The first deliberate attempt to breed for intelligence. And when Celia gives birth to a daughter in 1836, Cartwright names her subject number 1. He does not raise her with the other children. He does not allow her to work in the fields. Instead, he keeps her in a small cabin near the main house, away from her mother for most of the day. He teaches her himself. He gives her books, puzzles, and memory exercises. He tests her constantly, recording her progress in his journals with the cold precision of a man studying a lab animal. By the age of 5, subject number 1 can read at what Cartwright estimates is a 10-year-old level. She can perform arithmetic, recite poetry, and identify plants by their Latin names. Cartwright is thrilled. He believes he has proven his theory. Intelligence, he writes, can be cultivated through controlled lineage and rigorous training from infancy. The experiment is a success. But he is just getting started. Over the next 10 years, Cartwright expanded his program. He identifies a dozen enslaved individuals on his plantation who he deems intellectually superior. He arranges their unions, always with meticulous planning, always with an eye toward what he calls refinement of mental capacity. Children born from these pairings are separated from the general population. They are not given the same brutal labor as others. Instead, they are raised in isolation, educated in basic literacy and mathematics, and tested relentlessly. Cartwright keeps detailed charts tracking their development. He measures their heads every 6 months. He records their ability to solve problems, memorize information, and demonstrate what he considers markers of genius. By 1845, he had 23 subjects in his program, spanning 3 generations. He refers to them in his journals not by their names, but by numbers. Subject 4. Subject 11. Subject 19. They are data points. Variables in an equation he is determined to solve. But Cartwright's experiment is not happening in a vacuum. He is corresponding with other doctors, other men of science who share his fascination with heredity and race. He writes letters describing his methods, though he is careful never to reveal the full extent of what he is doing. He published a paper in 1844 in a Southern medical journal, titled On the Improbability of the African Mind Through Selective Breeding and Early Education. The paper is abstract, theoretical, full of careful language that suggests possibilities without admitting to direct experimentation. But those who know him, those who visit his plantation, begin to suspect something unusual is happening. Guests notice that some of the enslaved children on Cartwright's property are kept separate, that they are unusually educated, that they speak with a precision and vocabulary that makes white visitors uncomfortable. Whispers begin to spread. Questions are asked. But Cartwright is a respected man, a man of science, and in the world of the antebellum South, such men are given the benefit of the doubt. Then, in 1847, something changes. Subject number 1, now 11 years old, begins to resist. She has spent her entire life under Cartwright's control, isolated from her mother, from other children, subjected to constant testing and observation. She is brilliant. Even Cartwright admits it in his journals. But brilliance does not mean compliance. She begins refusing his lessons. She destroys her test materials. She speaks back to him in ways that enrage him, not because she is disrespectful, but because she is articulate, logical, impossible to dismiss. She tells him, in words he records with obvious fury, that she is not his experiment. That she is a person. That what he is doing is wrong. Cartwright responds the way men like him always respond when their authority is challenged. He punishes her. He isolates her further. He increases the severity of the tests, trying to break her will, trying to reassert control. But she does not break. And for the first time, Cartwright begins to realize that his grand experiment has a flaw he did not anticipate. Intelligence cannot be controlled. It can be cultivated, perhaps, but it cannot be owned. Subject number 1 is not the only one resisting. As the children in Cartwright's program grow older, they begin to understand what has been done to them. They see that they are treated differently from the other enslaved people on the plantation, but they also see that they are still enslaved. Education has not freed them. It has only made their captivity more unbearable because now they can articulate it, analyze it, and understand exactly how much has been stolen from them. By 1850, tension was rising. Several of the older subjects are now teenagers, young adults. They are asking questions. They are forming bonds with each other, bonds that Cartwright never intended, because he saw them as specimens, not as people capable of solidarity. And in the main quarters of the plantation, away from Cartwright's controlled environment, the other enslaved people are watching. Some resent the subjects, seeing them as favored, privileged. Others see them as victims of something even worse than physical labor. A theft of identity. A perversion of kinship. The plantation is fracturing. Cartwright doubles down. He begins a new phase of the experiment, what he calls the second refinement. He identifies the most promising subjects and begins pairing them with each other, trying to create a third generation that will be even more remarkable. He arranges a union between subject number 1 and subject number 6, a young man 2 years her senior who has demonstrated exceptional abilities in mathematics and logic. Cartwright writes that this pairing represents the apex of his research, the moment when two deliberately cultivated bloodlines will merge to produce what he hopes will be a child of extraordinary genius. Subject number 1 is 15 years old. She has no choice. She is forced into this union, forced to bear a child that Cartwright already refers to in his journals as subject number 24 before the baby is even conceived. And when she becomes pregnant in 1851, Cartwright's journals take on a tone of near-religious fervor. He writes about destiny, about legacy, about being on the verge of proving something that will change the world's understanding of human potential. He is losing his grip on reality, confusing his own ambition with scientific truth. The child was born in early 1852. A boy. Cartwright takes him from subject number 1 within hours of the birth. She is allowed to nurse him only under supervision, only at scheduled times. The rest of the time, the baby is kept in a separate room in the main house, attended by an older enslaved woman who has been instructed to follow Cartwright's strict protocols. No songs. No rocking. No unnecessary affection. The child is to be raised in an environment of pure intellectual stimulation, free from what Cartwright calls the contaminating influences of maternal sentimentality. He begins testing the baby's reflexes, his responses to stimuli, his rate of physical development. He is tracking everything, recording everything, convinced that this child will be the proof he needs. But the baby is sickly. He cries constantly. He does not thrive. And by the summer of 1852, he was dead. Cartwright records the death in his journal with clinical detachment. Subject number 24 expired at 4 months. Cause uncertain. Possible respiratory weakness. Bloodline may require further refinement. There is no mention of grief. No acknowledgement of the mother. Just data. Just failure. Just the need to try again. Subject number 1 does not recover. She falls into a deep depression, stops speaking, stops eating. Cartwright notes this in his records as evidence of inferior emotional regulation and moves on. He has other subjects. Other plans. But the death of the child marks a turning point. Word of what happened spreads among the enslaved community. The isolation Cartwright tried to maintain begins to crumble. People start talking. Start connecting the pieces. And they realize that what Cartwright is doing is not education. It is not benevolence. It is something monstrous. Something that treats their children, their families, their very bloodlines as raw material for his ambition. Anger begins to build. Quiet, careful, dangerous anger. In 1854, one of the older subjects, a young man named subject number 8, attempts to escape. He is 19, highly educated, fluent in Latin and Greek, capable of complex reasoning, and he uses all of that intelligence to plan his flight. He forges travel papers. He studies maps. He waits for the right moment. And one night in October, he runs. He makes it nearly 40 miles before he is caught by slave catchers and dragged back to the plantation. Cartwright is furious. He has the young man whipped, an act he has rarely resorted to with his subjects, because he has always believed that intellectual control is superior to physical violence. But now, faced with the failure of his methods, he falls back on brutality. He writes in his journal that the escape attempt is proof that intelligence without proper moral conditioning is dangerous, that his experiment must include not just cognitive development but also behavioral engineering. He is spiraling. His theories are collapsing under the weight of reality. But he cannot admit it. He cannot stop. The Civil War begins in 1861, and everything changes. The economy of the South convulses. Supply lines collapse. Young men are conscripted. Plantations struggle to function. Cartwright is aging now, in his 60s, and his health is failing. But he continues the experiment. Even as the world burns around him, he is still measuring heads, still recording data, still trying to prove that he was right. By 1863, many of the subjects had died, from disease, from neglect, from the chaos of war. Others have escaped in the confusion, fleeing north, disappearing into the crowds of displaced people that flood the southern roads. Cartwright's journals from this period are increasingly erratic. He writes long, rambling entries about betrayal, about the failure of his subjects to appreciate what he has done for them, about the tragedy of a society too ignorant to recognize his genius. He blames the war. He blames the subjects. He blames everyone but himself. In April 1865, Union troops arrived in Natchez. The plantation is abandoned. Cartwright has fled, taking only a few belongings. The enslaved people who remain burn the main house. They destroy the records they can find. But some things survive. The journals hidden in the overseer's quarters. The ledgers are buried in a cellar. The photographs are sealed in a trunk. And decades later, when these materials are discovered, the full scope of what Cartwright did finally comes to light. The experiment lasted 30 years. It involved more than 60 people across 4 generations. It resulted in countless separations, forced unions, stolen childhoods, and deaths that were never acknowledged as anything more than failed data points. And in the end, it proved nothing. Nothing except the capacity of one man to justify horror in the name of progress. What happened to the survivors? Most disappeared into history. A few names surface in Reconstruction-era records, people who took new identities, new lives, who never spoke publicly about what they endured. Subject number 1, the girl who resisted, who lost her child, who was the first victim of Cartwright's obsession, lived until 1898. She spent her final years in a small community in Tennessee, working as a teacher. She never used the name Cartwright gave her. She never told her students where she learned to read. But in a letter discovered in a church archive in 1974, she wrote to a friend, "I was born into an experiment I did not consent to. I was raised to be proof of a theory I did not believe. And when I finally escaped, I had to learn who I was without the numbers, without the tests, without the man who thought he could build genius in chains." That is the legacy of the doctor's experiment. Not breakthrough science. Not validated theory. Just trauma. Just stolen lives. Just the wreckage of ambition untethered from conscience. And here is the truly disturbing part. Cartwright was not alone. His ideas were not fringe. In the decades after the Civil War, eugenics became a mainstream movement in America. Forced sterilizations. Marriage restrictions. Immigration quotas. All justified by the same logic Cartwright used, the belief that human beings could be improved, controlled, engineered for desired traits. The experiment on that Mississippi plantation was a preview, a dark rehearsal for policies that would affect millions. And while we like to think of eugenics as a relic of a shameful past, the questions Cartwright asked have never really gone away. We still argue about intelligence and heredity. We still measure, categorize, rank. We have genetic testing now, gene editing, technologies that would have seemed like magic to a man like Cartwright. And every time we develop a new tool to shape human life, we have to ask ourselves the same question: just because we can, does that mean we should? Cartwright never asked that question. He assumed his brilliance gave him permission. He assumed science was neutral, objective, free from the moral weight of the suffering it caused. He was wrong. And the people he treated as subjects, as numbers, as variables in his grand equation, they paid the price for his arrogance. If this story shook you, if it made you think, if it reminded you why we have to learn history, even the darkest chapters, then do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button. Smash the like. Drop a comment telling me what you think about this case, because I read every single one. And share this video. Stories like this need to be told, need to be remembered, need to be understood so we never repeat them. There's more dark history coming, more buried secrets, more truths that need to see the light. Stay with me. And thank you for watching.